Hello and welcome to Newsfire with me, Ayza Omar. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he met with EU and NATO leaders in Brussels on Monday, demanding from them more support over the war in Syria. As Syrian government offensive to take the last rebel-held province back into control continues, hundreds of thousands of Syrians are fleeing towards Turkey, creating a huge refugee crisis. Today, Turkey already hosts over 3.5 million Syrians and in 2016 had signed a pact with the EU promising to halt the flow of undocumented migrants into Europe. In exchange, the 29-nation bloc promised €6 billion in assisting Turkey's refugee crisis. Last month, President Erdogan took a step back from this pact, allowing refugees to pass through Turkey and into Europe, saying his country no longer had the capacity to handle the influx of people without the help of its European allies. As a result, thousands of refugees are pouring towards Greece, either by boat through the eastern Mediterranean or from Turkey's border with Greece. Here's what President Erdogan said in Brussels yesterday.
It is beyond reason and understanding that an ally and a neighboring country points towards Turkey as the one responsible for the wave of irregular migration. Now I have expressed to the distinguished Secretary General that we are not going to allow this country to use this current situation and use the European Union in order to obtain unjust gains for itself.
Now, European Union countries, they've rallied behind Greece, which also a NATO member, and described it as a shield protecting Europe's borders. They have urged the Turkish leader to halt refugees and migrant departures and negotiate a new deal under which EU members would do more to alleviate the humanitarian situation on the Syrian border. How close are they to a solution? And is the solution really about how much money Turkey gets? Let's find out from our guests. Today we are joined by Dr. Andreea Stoian Karadeli, an independent researcher based in Istanbul in Turkey. And we also have with us Ms. Filippa Chatzistavrou, an assistant professor of international politics in the University of Athens. She's joining us from Athens today. We are also joined by Dr. Kamran, Gasanov, a senior lecturer at People's Friendship University of Russia, today joining us from Moscow. Welcome to all three of you. I would like to start with you, Dr. Andreea, about this meeting in Brussels between President Erdogan and top NATO and EU leaders. Do you feel like they've made any concrete decision yet, an agreement to move forward on this very difficult, complex situation that is this refugee crisis?
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. To quote one of the Turkish officials, the meeting was productive. Actually, every single step towards solving this crisis should be considered a step forward. The meeting was mostly on two topics. First, it was Idlib. The second was the refugee crisis. Of course, those two topics are extremely related and connected to each other. Turkey last week met the Turkish officials met the Russian officials as well to solve the escalation that has been witnessed in Idlib. And let's not forget that Idlib is actually the next refugee crisis. It's the reason why we're actually looking at the refugees at the border between Greece and Turkey, just because Idlib, it's the place, the source for more than 1 million refugees that are expected to come to Turkey in the eventuality that the crisis is going to continue in the Idlib province. Therefore, I do believe that the meetings were productive to a certain point, as if all sides kind of, expressed their opinions and their perspectives on the subject and on the context. And I do want to believe that all sides listen to the others and to the others' troubles and problems regarding the agreements that have been signed so far and regarding the situation that we are in at this moment.
So you're basically that it indicates that there is a positive step here. But Ms. Filippa, let me come to you here, quoting the foreign minister of Turkey. He made this quote also where he said that the EU must take sincere steps and that the European Union should stop stringing Turkey along, were his words, as I understand. This kind of indicates that there is a bit of a trust issue here. I mean, this 2016 pact, there was an agreement over 6 billion euros, half of which were only dispatched. And the situation of the refugees in Syria keeps getting worse. What is your feeling about how much of a progress they've made on Monday and Tuesday?
There is no progress. I think that for the moment there is a failure. But let's say, I think that we are in a very paranoid situation. First of all, since 2015, where it was a time of solidarity, now in 2020, we are at a very crucial moment of a new culture within the European Union, which is hard border control policy and the use of violence without any distinction. So we are not at the same point as in 2015. And this means that the EU should, all these years, it should have the possibility to create a coherent plan. And this was not the case. I mean, they did nothing. And now we have Greece as the country which is committed to protect EU's borders, which is a paranoid situation, and some European countries that they are willing to host vulnerable children. I mean, this is not a solution. This is a suicide. This is a collective suicide. And then we think that Turkey will cooperate in order to replace illegal immigration with legal, as Merkel said yesterday. I mean, I don't understand. I don't know how they work in their minds, all these people that are responsible.
So you're saying that legal is not the issue, it's the inflow of people itself?
I think that there is no possibility to have a solution, a real solution, because both parties, the EU and Turkey, actually they are violating the pact, the agreement. The agreement doesn't exist anymore. And we should bear in mind that this agreement is not a binding agreement. This means that there is no court, for example, the European Court, that has any kind of jurisdiction to rule on the legality of the agreement concluded by the member states and in Turkey. So for the moment, this pact is completely violated. And at the same time, we're discussing about how we could ameliorate the conditions of this pact and how Turkey could cooperate with the EU. You see, from my perspective, this is a paranoid situation.
I want to come to you here, Kamran, on this as well. There have been violations of not just the 2016 pact, and from both sides here. In fact, the European Commission head, Ursula von der Leyen, she said this, that the events of the Greek-Turkish border clearly point to politically motivated pressure on the EU's external border. Finding a solution to this will require relieving pressure that is put on the border. Given the condition of this, or I should say the outcome of this meeting in Brussels, the way forward hasn't been spelled out, it seems, from this meeting. What's your take on it?
More than 100,000 of people already crossed, and I think that these numbers can be much more bigger, and the European Union finally will pay the rest of money which the European Union promised in 2016.
Because, but Dr. Kamran, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here. Dr. Kamran, just quoting Ursula von der Leyen there, it's a political pressure, a politically motivated pressure, is it not? Because Turkey is not just looking for more funds, is it?
I totally agree that Turkey used the situation to gain much more than the money versus the accommodation of refugees, because Turkey speaks about customs union, extending of customs union, about visa-free, and also about delivering of Patriot missile systems and weapons in order to support Turkey in Idlib. However, Turkey recently concluded, Erdogan and Putin concluded a new peace deal. Nevertheless, I see that Erdogan doubts this deal and he never trusts Putin, and he is preparing Turkey to a new escalation, and he's not sure if Assad will move forward or not. At the same time, I can also understand the Europeans, because the reality, as the last expert said, had been changed. Now Turkey and European Union has a lot of problems because of the human rights in Turkey, because of Kurds, and in Syria because of Gulen, that the European Union, let's say, supported the regime change in Turkey, and also because of Libya, where the interests of European Union and Turkey also contradicts, and the Mediterranean pipeline, because Greece, Israel, and Cyprus concluded an agreement which doesn't correspond to the interests of Turkey, and they have a lot of problems, and I think that the European Union will not grant some preferences in accession process. The integration will not be moved forward.
Right. So, but Dr. Andreea, you like this was a positive move. It's moving towards progress, them agreeing to review the 4-year-old pact on the refugees. But it seems like President Erdogan has made it very clear on previous occasions that to NATO that they want their support on the battlefield. Is that something that you believe came up in these meetings, was addressed?
Yes, actually, according to the press conference, those subjects also came up and have been discussed. Turkey has made it very clear that it feels alone in Idlib right now. It feels alone in a proxy war, and it needs the help of its allies. It needs the help of NATO, and it needs the help of the EU. So the refugees are, yes, if you want to call it like this, they are a play card. They are a play card in many different contexts that have been already discussed by my previous speaker. However, the situation in Idlib is exactly where Turkey wants the NATO and the EU to come in by its side. Because the first reasoning that it gives is the fact, that the Turkish southern border is also the southern border of NATO, and Turkey at the same time is protecting the EU countries from the influx of refugees that have been coming into Turkey in the past years. Although the promises made by the EU have not been coming a reality, at least not entirely. Therefore, what Turkey is trying to say is the fact that it needs help right now. It needs to have allies by its side in a practical way, in a pragmatic way, not in just the declaration way of being an ally. And that's actually where Turkey has a problem with its allies. The fact that in the past years it has witnessed just declarations of support and not really any pragmatic.
But Dr. Andreea, do you feel like that maybe if they're in a hypothetical situation in the near future, if they came to an agreement where they would allow the flow of refugees, something that Turkey's been harping on about, that they can't handle that influx of people, would that resolve any of this?
Actually, what I believe it would resolve a lot of all this is a peaceful transition in Syria. This is actually the key. This is the solution that should be. Yeah, this is what we need to get to.
That's what it seems that Erdogan has been trying to get out of this meeting. Ms. Filippa, coming to you, because it's not just simply about the 2016 agreement. Erdogan's trying to use whatever influence he can to get some kind of control back in Syria. Idlib has been horrible for Erdogan. They've lost so many Turkish soldiers in the past 2 months. Do you feel that the EU may be able to make any kind of difference in the situation in Syria in the coming weeks?
I would say that it's more NATO that is in a position to do some things. But for example, we heard yesterday NATO saying that they are ready to give new military assistance to Turkey. They will continue to assist Turkey with a number of measures. So what is the meaning of that? I mean, we know that when we hear declarations by NATO, is Trump administration behind. So the thing is that Trump is supporting Turkey in this military operation, so NATO too. And so if we continue to assist Turkey, how we can have a solution also with the relation of this weapon of refugee flows? Because the thing is that the EU should use Turkey and the statement, the pact of 2016, as a deterrent weapon in order to establish a kind of containment policy. But this did work for some years, but how we are sure that it will continue to work if the operation in Syria continues and if NATO supports that?
So each is dependent on each other. President Erdogan, he's already given NATO a list of 10 requests which talk about greater air support on the Turkish-Syrian border, more reconnaissance aircraft, surveillance drones, ships in the eastern Mediterranean. President Trump had a conversation with President Erdogan. He couldn't get the approval for giving the Patriot missiles, so he said he'll talk to NATO leaders to try and get their military support. Having said that, do you feel that now is a point where that could be even vaguely possible?
I don't think so. I'm sorry, I don't think so. But because we cannot have NATO say at the same time, I'm going to continue to support military and also financially Turkey in Syria, and at the same time saying that I'm currently deploying forces in the Aegean to help deal with the refugee and migrant crisis. We cannot do both. You see what I mean? This is a hypocrisy strategy. We cannot do both. We should decide. Are we going to take some measures in order to stop what is happening in Syria? And this means stop assisting Turkey, first thing. And if we don't want to do that, then let's stop to discussing about how we can deal with the refugee and migrant crisis, because the problem will continue. So what we should understand is that this statement of this pact of 2016 is a big failure, and that both parties are responsible about this failure, not only Turkey, but the EU too. And so we cannot continue, the European Union cannot continue to use Turkey as a deterrent weapon. A containment policy and hard border control policy is not the solution to the problem.
Okay, so if that situation is, that is pretty much end all for the refugee, it is not end all for the refugee crisis. I would imagine it would exacerbate, because as President Erdogan stepped back from the 2016 deal last month, things would just get worse. But Dr. Kamran, let's come to you on this. What's Russia's response to this? What is the expected reaction? Because NATO chief went on to say that no other ally has suffered more from the terrorist attacks. No other ally holds more refugees than Turkey, and that NATO would continue to support Turkey in the events as this progresses, the refugee crisis. This must be a big concern for the Kremlin, of course.
I think that Kremlin is concerned because of possible higher support from the side of NATO to Turkey, because the more the NATO support, the higher the possibility of escalation. But at the same time, Moscow understands that now the situation is de-escalated after the Erdogan and Putin deal, and we organized the common patrols, police patrols along the M4 highway, and now the situation must be calm. But I could add also that the United States actually are not so ready to support Turkey, because they demand to refuse of Russian S-400 missiles, and Turkey will not do this, and that's why I don't believe that NATO will actively support, because NATO also doesn't like to risk a military conflict with Russia, and this is
exactly what it would lead to. Right, but Ms. Filippa, I want to come back to this. You said the solution is, besides of course there to be the end of war in Syria, the solution is to right now stop supporting Turkey. And if that were the case and the funding wouldn't come through for the refugees, or the military support wouldn't come through, the escalation of violence that is displacing these Syrians more than once is going to continue. So is it really the only choice to sort of isolate Turkey and taking on the Syrian regime on its own?
No, I mean, this is one part of the solution. It's not enough, of course. This is the first part. The second part is to have a coherent, multilateral, European-based agreement where all European countries will be forced to be engaged. And if they deny to be engaged, in this time we should have sanctions in order to have relocation with a very, let's say, equal way all over the European continent. And if we have that, and we establish an urgent procedure plan for asylum applications, I think that this is the start of the solution.
Coming to you, Dr. Andreea, here at this point, I mean, the EU leaders, they've considered taking in 1,500 child refugees to ease the pressure on these overwhelmed camps on Greek islands facing these new arrivals coming in from Turkey. Now, at the same time, we see the EU, the European Commission head, Ms. von der Leyen, say there's no immediate concrete offer of new funding, right? So, I mean, it's a big question here. Then how are they proposing to take in these 1,500 children? Is there any idea of how this can be tackled long term?
Yes, we are actually now getting to the reality. Those are human lives that we are talking about. And as you were saying, those are kids' lives that we are talking about. Those are kids that have already witnessed trauma. And it's a situation similar to the kids that you would witness in other camps, the camps at the border with Turkey. But those kids are the kids of the FDFs, of the foreign terrorist fighters, right? Those are the kids that in the future, if the situation is not managed correctly from all different aspects, psychological, social, cultural, economical, and so on, those are the kids that might become a new wave of terrorism, a new form of terrorism in the future of Europe and Turkey as well. Coming back a little bit to the topic of, leaving Turkey, isolating Turkey, that's not a solution. We're not getting anywhere by isolating any of the actors involved in the situation. What we need to do is to get back to the table and discuss and come from a very common platform among all of us. The common platform is that we need to solve this. And the only solution that we can see is by solving the situation in Syria first, for those people to have somewhere to go back to.
Right.
We don't have to take them anywhere, to Europe, Turkey, or any other country that you want.
So just on that, let me put this question to you, Dr. Kamran. It would be expected then that this would be the point where the Kremlin would step in or step up their efforts, in fact. Now, President Erdogan, President Putin, they've met on this. They declared a ceasefire. It is Ankara's concern that they need to create that safety zone. They need to create that buffer to stop not just the refugees flowing in, but the terrorists, the SDF fighters, their families, their children into its borders. When is it, or can we even expect Kremlin to come and make that move where escalation in Idlib finally comes down? It would take their effort, it would take their side to make a difference.
Yes, actually Russia already takes measures to stop the spreading of terrorists, because Russian Air Force, together with Assad forces, they bombed these terrorists exactly, which now moved to the European Union. As for your question, I think it's up to Turkey, because the migration flows to Turkey, and it will decide if it allows these terrorists go to Europe or not. And a couple months ago, I remember that Erdogan sent some Europe-originated terrorists, ISIS fighters, to Europe, and it's up to Erdogan. If we go to 2011, Europe also supported the regime change in Syria, and it imposed oil embargo, sanctions, and the economically situation was worse because of Europe as well, not only because of Turkey. And now the situation is so that Europe must make some measures because the influence of migrants, it can change regimes also in Europe. We see that far-right groups are growing, and Merkel is not interested.
Yes, then there are a lot of people to blame, but the ones currently involved in supporting the Syrian regime is Russia alone.
Yes, but Russia fights against terrorists, against Jabhat al-Nusra, and from the other side, we don't see that NATO or Turkey bombs al-Nusra. Even if this organization is not acknowledged as terrorist.
At the end of the day, it is that fight itself that is creating the refugee crisis that is now being the reason for 900,000 people losing their homes and having nowhere to head to. Unfortunately, we can't take this debate further. We've run out of time, but I'd like to thank all three of you, Dr. Andreea, Ms. Filippa, and Dr. Kamran, for joining us. We'll now take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. Now, Russia has renewed its political efforts to bring Palestinian factions closer to internal reconciliation and to also create a united Palestinian stance against U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. Now, Hamas's political chief, Ismail Haniyeh, he announced at a March 4th press conference in Moscow a 4-point proposal for internal Palestinian reconciliation. Those 4 points specifically are forming a national unity government, holding comprehensive Palestinian elections, holding a Palestinian National Council meeting outside of Ramallah so that all Palestinian factions can participate, and lastly, holding a meeting for the faction's Secretary General. Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who met Hania's delegation in Moscow, he welcomed the proposals and he expressed Moscow's readiness to host the Palestinian factions meeting. According to the Islamic Jihad, the Russian Foreign Ministry had also invited them. In fact, they specifically invited Secretary General of Islamic Jihad Ziad Nakala to visit Moscow. And then on February 27th, we saw Lavrov had met in Moscow with Hussein al-Sheikh, a member of Fatah's Central Committee. So there are 2 points we are looking to explore today. One, the possibility of a breakthrough in these Moscow-brokered reconciliation talks, and also what is Russia's stake in sponsoring reconciliation talks for the Palestinians, especially at a time when it is embroiled in fighting in Syria and taking on the Saudis in a price war over oil. Let's ask our guests. We have today with us Mr. Pavel Luzin, a PhD in international relations, expert in Russia's foreign policy and defense. He's joining us from Perm, Russia. And then we also have Mr. Jafar Ramini, Palestinian writer and political analyst, joining us from Perth, Australia. Welcome to both of you. Let's get right down to this reconciliation process. This is not the first time. There's nothing new about these proposals. Mr. Luzin, considering all the previous exercises that have failed, they failed in February 2019, 2018, 2017 agreement, what do you see, if anything, new in this?
So, in my opinion, Russia definitely doesn't care about real reconciliation in Palestine. Russia needs peace process for process, because Russia wants to increase its weight in international relations, especially in face of the United States and Europe. And that's why Russia tries to play a role of moderator of peace process in Palestine, but Russia doesn't need a real reconciliation. But at the same time, I'm not sure that Russia would be very successful in this way, because of Russia depends more on relations with Israel, good relations with Israel. And currently, our efforts, our activity is just increasing our diplomatic weight in international relations.
It's a very complicated. It's a very complicated decision, especially when you look at the sort of two-pronged relationship, it seems, that Russia has with each country here that we're talking about. I mean, even with Israel, while it might have good relations on one side, the other side it supports the Syrian regime. But we'll get into that, more of that later. Coming to you, Mr. Ramini, back onto this same point, the reconciliation process itself, the proposals, do you see anything new? All these previous exercises especially have failed. Could there be a possibility of breakthrough?
You know what, I really don't know why we, the Palestinians, need a chaperone or a sponsor to talk to each other. This is ridiculous. As the gentleman said, Russia is not interested in us. Russia is interested in the interests of Russia. And the stupidity of the American administration has invited them through the front door in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, and now in Palestine. The Palestinian factions, as you call them, in my opinion, and I'm a Palestinian of 76 years, and I lived this from the day one, they are the enemy of the Palestinian people, because this division plays in the hands of the occupation, plays in the hands of the regional powers, and plays in the hands of the United States of America, who wants to finish once and for all the Palestinian
Mr. Ramini,
subject, if you like.
You say that it plays in the hands of powers and those who are looking to obviously push forward and see the success of the Middle East plan, Trump's so-called deal of the century. The factions, as they fight with each other, are each looking to get a stronger foothold, right? In a very disconcerted, a very fragmented political front. One would then see maybe one of them at least trying to endorse the Middle East plan, wouldn't they?
Look, the Arabs are not interested in Palestine. The Arabs are interested in their own internal affairs, in keeping their shaky crowns on their heads, and to hell with Palestine, even to hell with Jerusalem. My interest is the Palestinian people. If the Palestinian people are giving the slightest chance to deal with the occupation, they will deal with it. The people who are in our way of dealing with Israel are Fatah, i.e. the PA in Ramallah, and Hamas in Gaza. They both say, lip service, we want to liberate Palestine. We want to establish a two-state solution. Look around you, boys. There is no way there is a two-state solution. You are living under apartheid, and apartheid has just been sanctioned by the United States of America, the most powerful empire known to man. It's about time that those politicians grow up, be mature, and not put their weight on one side or the other. Nobody is coming to our rescue. What we should do is finish this division and say, okay, we put the interest of Hamas to this side, and we put the interest of Fatah to this side, and the other factions. Let's all unite, and let's all face this existential threat as presented by Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu. But would they? I don't think so. This is a Palestinian problem and should be solved by Palestinians in-house without inviting foreign interference.
This Middle East plan, it should have been that opportunity for all Palestinian factions to put on a united front for their cause alone, for their people. However, the opportunity, if anybody has seized it, it seems Russia has. Their role in hosting these talks is nothing new. It's been happening for years. And at this point, after President Trump's policies, especially when he declared Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognized it back in December 2017, do you see the success of Russia there, Mr. Luzin, as filling that void that the U.S. has left?
I see that Russia currently is trying to play the card of reconciliation because of weaknesses of government in Israel, because currently there is a political crisis in Israel, and because of Trump initiative towards Israeli-Palestinian reconciliation, de facto failed. So if the United States fails, if Israel currently cannot be so active because of domestic political troubles, so Russia just try to place these weaknesses, try to place these cards, and try to come in this shop as a huge bear and just play its role, just increase its
But this time round,
weight.
Mr. Luzin, wouldn't you say this time things are a little more heated up? The dynamics are much more different on at least the international sort of geopolitical sphere. Like Moscow hosted these talks, similar talks last year, around the same time, February 11, 2019. Nothing concrete came out of it. But what did come out of it was that there was a very definite posturing, a very definite message that they sent to Washington and Tel Aviv, considering the circumstances now, what with the price war with the Saudis and the situation in Syria. Is that message coming across stronger? Is it any threat to the West?
No. From time to time, Russia tries to invite Hamas leaders, Fatah leaders in Moscow to talk with them. From time to time, Russia announces its peace initiatives in Middle East, but because of lack of real sources, Russia cannot propose something sustainable. For example, for Palestine, because what can Russia give to Palestine? I'm afraid nothing, neither in economic sense nor in political sense. And Russia just see these weaknesses of Americans and Israelis and just come there and start to bargain, not with Palestinian factions, but
you talk
for example,
about sources,
with Tel Aviv.
You talk about lack of resources here. I mean, it's fully embroiled in the Syrian conflict with an incredible amount of investment, not just military equipment, but millions of dollars being invested in that fight over there. I mean, surely resource is not as big a concern as maybe the intention is.
In Syria, Russia gave its military power to Assad. So in Palestine, Russia doesn't have such a source like military power. Russia
it probably can't because they're so divided with each other. Who are they going to support?
Russia wants to sell, in my opinion, as I see the situation, wants to sell its participation in so-called Palestinian reconciliation for less engagement of Israel in Syrian conflict, as I see, because it's evident for me that when Russia starts do something in Palestinian issue, Israelis come and say, guys, stop, please, don't do something here because it's very sensitive area. What do you want? And Russia can propose, guys, just stop your bombing of Assad, of Iranians in Syria, or if you cannot stop to bomb them, but to try to decrease the level of bombing. And
you say you're talking about influence. Right, you're talking about influence. Sorry to cut you, we're running out of time. Mr. Ramini, quickly coming to you. I hear you on your point that the Palestinian politicians, the leaders, they need to grow up. The factions responsible for this divide need to have a united front at this time. But considering just recently, earlier this year, the Palestinian Authority had just slapped additional punitive measures against Gaza. In fact, I would like to quote one minister of civil affairs. He said that it was Mr. Hussein Sheikh, I believe. He said at that point in January that we will never tolerate Hamas now and we will take all measures to besiege Gaza. Considering that they are right now facing the US and Israel on a very horrible Mideast peace plan, this could be a golden opportunity, could it not, to line up behind Moscow's support?
If this doesn't glue them together, even as I said, put our special interest aside and let's get together to confront this evil plan, the Palestinian nation will rise up, believe me, everywhere and get rid of them. This is the litmus test for the Palestinians as well, not only in the West Bank and Gaza, but in 1948 and in the diaspora. These people are playing with fire. They are playing with the destiny of the Palestinian nation. We do not need any mediator from the outside. We all can talk to each other. We are all of a certain age, of a certain experience, of a certain education. Let us sit together without preconditions. Mr. Haniyeh said, come to Gaza without any preconditions. Yet the PLO say, Mr. Haniyeh, we agreed with you in 2017, yet you have not facilitated the implementation of any of these agreements. It's all child play, it's a waste of time, and it's costing us blood, and it's costing us land, and it's costing our people back home their freedoms and their dignity. Enough is enough. Hamas and Fatah, I hope you're listening to this. You are the enemy of the Palestinian people. Israel, put it aside. We want you to go off our backs so we can do something and build the country and build a real resistance to the occupation and to the Zionist infiltration of our land.
Thank you, Mr. Ramini. A strong message and hopefully will reach the right ears there. We've run out of time. Mr. Pavel, Luzin, thank you for joining us also. We've come to the end of the program. We will see you next week with more episodes of Newswire, more news and analysis. Till then, goodbye.